My name is Richard Ferrer, and I can say I am cloud hired.
That yes, come and join and get cloud hired. I'm cloud hired.
I'm Cloud Hired.
I'm Cloud Hired.
Hey, Go Cloud Architect family. I'm Cloud Hired.
But I'm Cloud Hired, guys.
So I'll just say I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired thanks to Go Cloud Architects.
It worked for me, and now I'm cloud hired. Because of Google Architect program, I am cloud hired. See!
I am Cloud Hired. Thank you, Mike and the GlowCloud team.
Welcome, everyone. This is Mike Gibbs, and I'm here to help you build your career. Maybe you have a goal of becoming a cloud architect, or a solutions architect, or an enterprise architect, or a network architect, or a security architect, or really any other tech career for that matter. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mike Gibbs. I'm the CEO of Go Cloud Careers. I've been an enterprise architect, a security architect, a network architect for well over 25 years. I've spent more than 2 decades helping people just like you get your first tech job, get promoted in tech. And you can see graduates and people I've worked with and trained and consulted over the years about their careers working at Apple, Amazon, Cisco, Google, IBM, Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, Capgemini, Microsoft, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Barclays Bank, JP Morgan Chase Bank, companies like Zscaler, Netbook, Palo Alto, and about any other prestigious organization you can think of. And I want you to have a great career. I want you to have the best career. And I remember what it was like when I started 25 years ago and I didn't know where to go. So that's why I'm trying to help you build your career path, tell you how to get to your goals. So bring me your questions and I'll do anything I can to assist you. I see a few questions have come in. Don't be shy. I really want to do anything I can to help you get to your goal, whatever that goal may be. I've interviewed 6,000 people. I've coached people for decades in all parts of the world, and I want to help you get to your goal. So please ask us your questions. Now, before I get to answering questions, I want to tell you about a couple things we have going on. Tomorrow, we have a free webinar on how to become an artificial intelligence architect. Now, it'll be my good friend David Lithicum with me. He's been working with artificial intelligence for a little over 35 years. He was Deloitte's chief cloud strategist. And he's going to be there with me. And of course, I will be there and we will talk about the artificial intelligence career, all the skills that you need, what we do in these roles, how to get ahead, how to get hired for these. And it's a completely free webinar. We'll speak, David and I, for about 30, 35 minutes, and we'll answer your questions for upwards of 2 hours because we really want to help you build your career. And it's completely free. It's completely live. And of course, if you want to ask questions about a security architect career or an AI architect career, an enterprise architect, or any other architect career, David and I are there. And we've done all these roles and we just want to help you. So join us tomorrow. It's completely free. We have guides if you're looking on how to build your career, on how to be, say, a security, how to become a cloud architect or an AI architect or other architects, guides on how to win the interview, and they're all free in the description of this video. So go grab them, sign up for them. They'll be emailed to you. And for those of you that have been following us for a while and you want to be part of one of our architecture programs to build your entire architecture career, great news. We have our summer savings, which is 50% off. And it's off of every program we have right now that's live. So take advantage of it while it's there. So, Chris, it looks like people are starting to ask questions. And please, I encourage you to ask questions. I really want to help you build your career. Chris, let's start bringing some of these questions in. And while we're there, maybe give me a hashtag or let me know which career you want in the chat box. I'm just curious as well. Adam123, what career paths exist, for example, for solutions architects, enterprise architects, data A architect, pre-sales, etc.? So realistically speaking, there's a couple of different kinds of architecture careers. At the top, and you know what, maybe I'll draw this out for you. Let me show you the different types of architecture careers. And there's a couple different kinds. And they're all great. I've done every last one of them. And let's talk about the various kinds of careers. So let me just get my setup here so I can share something with you, and I'll map it out real time, the different types of careers. I'm going to start with the business architect, which is a little different than the majority of the technology architects. And then I'm going to get into the enterprise architects so you can see where we all fit, because I've done all these architecture roles. So if we go to this chart, which I'm going to draw right now, the first thing I want you to see is we basically have the C-suite. And at the top of the C-suite, we have the CEO. The CEO is basically responsible for the strategy of the organization. And every part of it, we've got the chief operating officer. They're typically the number 2 in the company. They run the company, all the operations and everything that goes along. We have a chief financial officer. And we may have a chief, and we will have a chief information officer. So this is the top of an organization. Now, when you arc as a management consultant, also called a business architect, here's where you're working. In a business architect role, you kind of work here. Now, I've worked in this role. This is your typical management and strategy consultant from McKinsey. This is an executive role. Now I'll break it down so you can see where the security architect role is, because I see people are curious fits in. But this is the business architect role. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to say this business architect fits in from here to here. And under the CIO, and then I'm going to draw it, you're basically going to have, actually, we're just going to, in another chart, I'll just draw the CIO down. But understand this is where we business architects work. And to a degree, as an enterprise architect, half of our work, I'd say a third of our work, is with this team over here. But now let's break it down one step further for the architect. So I'm just going to go straight down this CIO suite. So if we look at the CIO as the chief of the entire technology team, and that's what they are, the chief information officer, you typically have a couple roles underneath it. Now, you typically have somebody that runs the operations of the teams, kind of like the COO version that the CEO has. And this is typically a VP or an SVP of IT. And what they're doing there is they're managing the operations. Now, if it's an organization that's very strategic, where technology is important to them, they're also going to have a chief strategist here. And that's chief strategist is going to be called the chief architect. It could be called the chief enterprise architect. But this is an enterprise architecture role. And depending upon where this role over here can be as little as a $300,000 role to as much as $1 million plus, and usually is a $500,000 plus role if you're in any reasonable size enterprise company. Now, right underneath that, you have the enterprise architecture role. And when you see this, I can show you how it's easily going to drive the career path. And we may also, in today's world, and it doesn't always exist this way, we might also have a chief information security officer that sits under the CIO. Sometimes they're at peer with the CIO, but usually there are reports to the CISO. And the CISO, well, the chief enterprise architect is responsible for all the architecture strategy. The chief information security officer is responsible for managing risk and managing information security risks. And it's all part that feeds into the CIO as a general role. So over here, we have an enterprise architect. Now, I love this role. This is the most executive of all the architect roles, this role and this role. They're all good, but I'll tell you why I enjoy this role and why this is the one where I have the most fun. Doesn't make it the right one. It's the one where I enjoy it the most. Because when you're in this enterprise architect role, look where you're really working. You're working in two places, because the enterprise architect role is a people, processes, and technology. We enterprise architects cross over into this business architect world, and we'll have to spend a lot of time with the CEO, COO, CFO, and CIO. We may even have to speak to the board. So That means that enterprise architect is always here, which means building relationships and getting known by the C-suite. So if we go back to that enterprise architect, I hope you can see it's a hop, skip, and a jump to either the chief architect or the CIO. So these things I want to go here. Now with this SVP, you could move into one of these roles as well. CIS role, that would be better for a security architect to move their way up. And I will give project examples, but it's more important, Harish, I want you to understand what the architect does, and we'll talk about that later too, and others. So this person here is responsible for people, processes, and technology. So we're going to be dealing with predominantly executive things here. It's this enterprise architecture role. So when I'm in this role, and this is an architecture role in general, what are we kind of working on? Well, we're obtaining requirements, meaning eliciting information from executives, knowing which questions to ask, how to ask for questions, reading in between the lines and the hidden meanings people tell us. So we're working with stakeholders and influencing stakeholders across the organization. We're mapping out stakeholders, mapping out business processes, mapping out value streams. There's a reason I'm saying this. They all sound kind of executive-y too. There's a good reason. We're negotiating architectural trade-offs, whether that be a business architecture or tech architecture. We're performing heavy-duty strategic planning. We're building cross-functional teams. We're leading teams. We're performing risk analysis. We're doing a lot of executive communications where we distill complex risk and technologies into something simple people can earn. So because of that, in this role as an enterprise architect, this is 80% executive. This is where I wear my Armani suits and make sure that my shoes are perfectly polished and my belt's perfectly polished. And these are extraordinarily high-paying roles, and they go straight here in many cases. Just like you see management and strategy consultants, which are business architects, say from McKinsey and others, move into these roles as well. Because when you're consulting to this world, you have to basically think and act here. So if we go down one level, we get into the multi-cloud architect. And this is a beautiful job. I train a lot of people for this job. And the reason the cloud architect is multi-cloud is 98% of enterprises are multi-cloud. So in this role here, cloud architect, I'm going to call it cloud architect. So in this role over here, this is a 75% executive role. We're managing an architecture team, leading a team, managing stakeholders, managing vendors, managing cloud providers. So, this is a business executive role. Now, when we go down one level, we start getting into solutions architect roles. And I'll explain what they are. Normal solutions architect roles are pre-sales. So if I'm a cloud architect, the people from AWS, like a sales rep called an account manager, and a sales engineer or a solutions architect is going to try to convince me to buy their stuff. So the AWS people are going to come in, their solutions architects, to try to convince me to use the AWS service versus the Azure service. So I'll have solutions architects from, say, AWS and Microsoft. And that's where the solutions architects fit in. They're kind of the junior people. This is why this is often people's first tech job, the solutions architect. I can give you countless examples. And this basically is a person that tries to guide the architects into adopting their technology. Now, we'll also have really great architects. Like we're going to have IAM architects, and the IAM architects are going to be responsible for the organization's identity and access management strategy. We're going to have security architects, and these security architects are going to be focused on protecting risk. We're going to have AI architects that are going to be focused on AI strategy. Now, understand that in none of these roles, you'll be allowed to touch the technology as a role, potentially down here, but never up here. These are executive positions. So there'll be AI architects, there'll be network architects. So we'll put some network architects and all those specialties that you're going to need. Voice architects, video architects, there's going to be an architect that's going to be part of your architecture team, which you have to lead. And then, of course, we're going to also have solutions architects. So let's say you've got an IAM solution you want. Well, maybe there's Okta's going to send their solutions architects because they want you to use the Okta solution versus the Active Directory solution, for example. And for the security solutions architects are going to come in from, say, Cisco and Palo Alto and Fortinet and Checkpoint to try to convince you design and convince you to use their stuff. So that's where these architecture roles. So often these roles tend to move into these roles over time. Or the person takes these roles to, say, a principal architect, where they're basically more of a tech specialist on something. And that can be the equivalent of moving up. The principal architect is typically the technical equivalent of an enterprise architect. Like an enterprise architect is typically like a director level position, and a principal architect is also like a director level position. So it kind of puts you into that same way, where the architect could either go to the technical route to the principal architect or distinguished architect, or they can go this other route, which usually pays more, up the executive route, which would move into CIO, CTO type roles further there. That's typically where you can take these careers. And why is it? Why are these careers so good for that? Well, because they require so much exercising influence, so much strategy, so much business acumen, so much executive presence. You're balancing trade-offs. You're making decisions with incomplete information. That's kind of the big difference. So that's why architecture careers are really great. And what's even better about architecture careers is when you look at the skills of the future that the World Economic Forum has talked about, knowing full well that some skills are going out of favor, like the skills we talked about years ago that were going away, you can now find yourself in a position where you have skills that no one can do, the skills of the future, and they're all required for the architect job. For example, AI and big data, the World Economic Forum. Let me share you with this. I think it'll help you kind of understand this. And I know I spent a lot of time on this one, and it's not normally what I like to do, but this was just such an important one. I thought I'd really give it time because I thought it would be helpful to everybody. So if we look at the World Economic Forum's, Future Jobs 2030 report, and we should, and we've been saying this for years if you follow what we've posted in all the various magazines. The skills of yesterday are things like programming and math, because we've got AI to do these kind of things. Quality control, because AI can kind of help. But look at the skills of the future. And these are the skills that, realistically speaking, can't be replaced by AI. And look at how many of them are in the architecture world. I'm trying to make it as big as I can for you to see it. So AI and big data, well, there's no architect I know. Enterprise architect, cloud architect, security architect doesn't have some focus on it. Technological literacy, well, yeah, the architect needs that. Talent management, in the architect role, you're going to be basically leading teams and bringing out the best in others. Systems thinking, architecture is a systems thinking role. What is the impact of one change on the system to another one? Leadership and influence, the architect job is a job where you lead people, you influence them, you influence the C-suite into making a decision, you create a cultural change for something. So that's part of the job. Creative thinking, you're constantly trying to solve a problem, business problem, tech problem. Analytical thinking, yeah, you're going to have to look at the trade-off between the AWS WAF versus the Palo Alto WAF. Is the AWS simplicity worth losing some of the security functionality? That kind of trade-off thing. Performance, reliability, flexibility, and agility. Well, pretty much this is the perfect job description for the architect role. So I hope that helped, and I hope that helped the others that were asking similar questions. And Chris, this is great. Let's bring in some more questions. What should a portfolio contain if one wants to show off the skills for a cloud architect role? How about constructing their portfolio if no one has yet to work with a cloud professional? Okay, so the first thing, and I want you to come to one of our architecture webinars, because I want you to know what a cloud architect does in their job. Now, what we don't do in our job is we don't code, we don't configure, we don't implement. So if you build a portfolio that shows me that you set up a WordPress website, or that you knew how to do Linux, or that you write a Python script or a Bash shell script, what you're showing me is you don't even know what an architect is. So the real key becomes is if you're going to build a portfolio, it has to show things that you're actually doing as an architect to show off the skills. And you're going to have to be taught these skills. You're not naturally going to know these skills like you don't know how to fly an airplane. I know how to practice internal medicine now, but I didn't before I went to school for it. So what goes in it is going to be the work you do as an architect. So as an architect, we're going to be creating reference architectures. So maybe we create a reference architecture for a hospital and the types of things that it would need from an architectural perspective, from say maybe an application perspective. Or how might you promote data privacy in a hospital that complies with HIPAA laws, that kind of thing. So that could be like a reference architecture, and you'll definitely need various reference architectures in an architecture portfolio. Now, in an architecture portfolio, you're going to be doing things, for example, responding to RFIs or RFPs or RFQs. So, and obviously students in our programs will be doing this. So you should have some RFP type responses that you've responded to for various architecture RFPs, because it's proving that you can actually do the job. Now, one of the things we create is a lot of architectural artifacts or a lot of architectural documents. So you should be familiar with having, and you should be creating various architectural documents. Architectural documents could be mapping out an organization's business architecture. An architectural artifact could be looking at organization's value stream. An architectural artifact could be looking at the data flow throughout the organization, or the application architecture for the organization, or the network architecture for the organization. So, those types of architectures, which are going to show both big picture architectures, and as we talk about in architecture, various architectural views. So you might want to show just something different to the CIO that's going to say yes that you might actually do to the network engineer. So you should have various architectural views that you've done. Now, as architects, people think we draw pictures. We don't draw that many pictures. We draw some pictures, but we create a lot of documents. So you should actually have some architectural documents that you've created in your architecture portfolio. Now, you should have, and most architects create some thought leadership. They created a reference architecture, some thought leadership designed to guide an industry to basically go in a certain direction. You should have some white papers, thought leadership type documents there. And that's what goes into an architecture portfolio. And if you look at my portfolio or David Lithicum's portfolio or even a Russ White type portfolio, you're always going to see these. So that's really going on there. So the key is you're going to have to do this, because in most cases, you're probably not going to know how to design a strategy for a bank unless you're taught. Much like somebody won't know how to do surgery or fly an airplane until they're taught. So what you got to do is you have to create real world actual architectures. And that's why when people come to me, we get them hired so easily, because we're putting them through the architect job and they actually have a real portfolio. So that's what it is. So, I mean, if you're with us, it's going to be obvious. If you're not with us, if you think about what happens when someone graduates an MBA program and then they get hired by McKinsey or Accenture or Deloitte or KPMG and Capgemini, do you know what they actually do for the year? Very similar to what we do. They teach the person how to talk, how to walk, how to present, how to build a business case, how to sell, how to lead, how to carry a meeting, how to facilitate a meeting, how to bring the best out in others, how to be CXO relevant and all those. Then they teach them, the new MBA graduates, because they wouldn't know how to consult either, how to consult. And then all of a sudden they call them management and strategy consultants or business architects. So you need that training. I mean, either you get it from us or you get it from an MBA program, but you really need to be able to understand, how do you walk into a business? What is that business's capital structure? Oh, wait, they're debt heavy and they want to clear out that balance sheet. Then an operational expense like cloud computing is looking awfully good. Oh, wait, they've got a high throughput workload. That high throughput workload and a 7% cost of capital. Wow, that's going to be a lot cheaper to run that workload there because their balance sheet's clean. So that's the kind of thing to do. I want to invite you, come to my webinar tomorrow, because I'll go over everything we do in the architect role. And then we'll talk about what we do and the skills. And yes, it's going to be about AI, but guess what? It's David Lithicum and me there, and we'll answer these questions for you too, because we just want you hired. Hope to see you tomorrow live. And please ask more questions. Shahad Salim from India. You have 12 years experience in IT. Your major work so far has been on data engineering. You're targeting an AI architect or a data architect role. How to achieve this? So first, I want you to join David and I tomorrow for the AI architect job. The next thing I want you to realize is that AI engineering has absolutely nothing to do with AI architecture or data architect or data engineering. So architecture and engineering are very different. Now, I'm going to tell you also that you have a lot of valuable skills that you gleaned that you'll be able to do different types of things later from your technology background, but it's going to be very different. And here's the reason why, and here's what you're going to need to do. You're going to have to learn the rest of the skills that you don't get from building. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that. So what you have to do as an AI architect is the following. You have to be able to go to the executive team, meaning the C-suite, and find the goal and the vision for their business. Where's the business now? What are the key challenges and problems that businesses have? Where are they going 2 years from now and 5 years from now? So that means in order to do that and have a C-suite conversation, because you really can't help a client if you don't do that. And why is this the first component of an architecture? Well, here's the reason. And here's what the architect does. We have to mediate between the executives and the tech people. And here's the reason why most companies have a problem, which is why we have to start with the executive team. Imagine you were a world champion person who jumps out of the airplanes at the highest level possible and did all kinds of cool stuff. That was your hobby. And because of that, you needed special parachutes, special equipment, special gear, and you were the expert on it. And because of that, you packed your parachute and you packed your gear. And accordingly, you keep getting in the Guinness Book of World Records for all the coolest stuff you're doing. Now, imagine if somebody packed that parachute that knew nothing about skydiving, knew nothing about stunts, and knew nothing about it. That parachute probably wouldn't do the job and it wouldn't be successful. So what goes on in many companies is there's a disconnect between the executives and the engineers. And reality is they basically build tools that the teams can't even use. So that's why we first start with the executive team to find the business. Then what we have to do is understand how that organization operates, specifically the key business processes, the key business value streams. We then, as an architect, need to work with that organization's executives and stakeholders to try to optimize the process to do it in the most efficient way. Now, at that point, we have to evaluate the organization's tech platform and their data platform. We're going to look at their AI, their networking, their data center, their cloud tools, their application security, even their voice and video systems. We're going to see what our capabilities are now. And then we're going to figure, where do we want to be in the future? We're going to have to say, look, we're here. What do we need to get here? We're going to have to lead an architecture team, which is going to be 15 to 50 people for the next 6 to 12 months to try to figure that out. Then when we finally figure out that, we document the strategy, bring it to the organization, stakeholders get their feedback, tune this. This goes back and forth for 3 to 6 months with a team of 15 to 50 people. Now, once that plan's done, we get our architectural contract signed, any RFP responses, statements of work, what have you. And we go to another team. We go to another project. We create our security, our security policies, our incident response procedures. That's what we do. So because of that, most of the skills you're going to need to learn are sales skills, because you're going to have to sell the architecture, a different level of communication skills. You're going to be giving presentations every day as an architect, so you're going to need to learn to present. You're going to have to write for executives to convince them that their risk is a certain amount, and therefore they should spend a certain amount to protect it. And you're going to have to lead an architecture team. You'll have to know how to present to the C-suite, how to present to the board, risk management, and such. So even build a business case around it. So that's going to be the first set of skills that you need. Now, I'm going to make it very clear, we don't build anything, and it's of no value if you know Python, if you know R. It's not going to help you in your job because you're not going to be doing that. What you're going to need to understand is compute knowledge and all the various forms of compute that you could potentially use, and the strengths and weaknesses when you use a GPU versus an FPGA, for example, versus just a plain ASIC. You're going to have to understand the key networking that's necessary to make all this work, which means network design skills to a degree. You're going to have to understand both data center and cloud computing, because you're going to have to understand how it all works and how it fits together and where and when it should be hosted. It's going to take a fair amount of security knowledge, because it's going to be focused on how do we keep the AI secure. Lots of data design, data hygiene, data governance skills, governance, ethics, compliance. So this is a very different role than we need. Now, in this case, you're not coding anything, and we don't even care if you could code. But I do care if what your knowledge would be, and you probably have some of it, is on databases, the strengths and weaknesses of the different kinds of databases, the types of training data that we could use, what kind of privacy techniques we might need to use, say obfuscation, tokenization, whatever other data that's we're going to be using it. Things like AI inference engines and AI model building and AI model tuning and AI operations and model testing. Very, very, very different than those skills of an engineer. So join us in the webinar with David Lithicum tomorrow, because we help people make that transition all the time, because it's a different job. But all your knowledge will come back and we can reuse it. We just have to teach you now how to apply your knowledge versus how to do it, not just a new skill. That's how you achieve these roles. You have to remember they're different. There's about 10% skill carryover between engineering, so you have to learn the other 90% of skills. That's what I did, and that's what most people do, and I help people do it all the time, with or without a tech background. Great question. On average, how many cloud architects will a company size? Will this depend on the size of the company? So at Aliki, absolutely. There are companies that have thousands of architects working for them. Be thousands of cloud and solution and AI and network architects. There's companies that have 10 and 20, even 30 and 40, 50,000 tech people that actually working for them. And I mean, there's companies that have 10 and 20,000 and 30,000 people just doing their tech. Not even tech companies, just managing the technology system. So there's thousands of architects at a global enterprise. And the key is there's never going to be one architect that ever can do an architecture by themselves. And, you know, people think it's like an AWS certification. There is nothing in cloud architecture or solution architecture that looks anything like an AWS certification, because here's the reality. The people that hire architects are enterprises, and enterprises may have 10,000 locations. They may have 1,000 different applications. They may be across 3 clouds and 10 data centers and 2 location providers. They're not using cloud native tools. They can't because it won't work in their environments. And there's 10 security vendors, 10 networking vendors, 200 vendors to manage. So when you start looking at the actual real complexity, 100,000 servers, that kind of stuff, 200,000 IP addresses, 5,000 routes in a routing table, that's the real world. Whereas, you know, the certifications don't even scratch the surface to that. So that's the real world. So accordingly, in a real enterprise, we're going to have a lot of architects. I will tell you, you know, David and I always talk about this. We say, what is an average cloud architecture that we work on? Now, granted, we're higher level architects. We've been the principal, we've been the distinguished. We're all at the CIO, CTO, CEO level, David and I. But we will say on the architectures we lead, as at least a cloud architect, we're dealing with 15 to 50 people working for us as part of our architecture team. Now, when we get into big global enterprise architectures, that could be hundreds that we could be working with us on our project throughout the life of a project. And there will still be thousands of people supporting potentially the hundreds of people in your architecture team, because architects don't touch the technology. We're pulling information, asking questions, what have you, translating between business needs and what technology people can do. So that's just the architects, and imagine how many people are actually going to build out what we architects design. Project ideas for a cloud security architect. Absolutely. So reference architectures, for example, of various demilitarized zones. Reference architectures of various IAM strategies that an organization could use. Potential thought leaderships on what documents on the weaknesses inherent to cloud computing. And there's so many weaknesses inherent to cloud computing, like weak perimeters, shared infrastructure, for example. I could go on forever. And why they need a new security paradigm like zero trust. You might create some thought leadership around zero trust. You might have an RFP response to various RFP security problems. You might, for example, my students right now are going to be presenting on Thursday night. Honestly, the architectures that they're doing on how to design AI security for an organization. So you should have architectures that you've worked on. You should have architectural case studies that you've worked on. You should have architectural documents of all kinds. You should have architectural presentations that you've delivered. You should potentially have security policies that you've written, incident response procedures, standard security standards, and security guidelines that you've written. Anything that falls into the architecture world, which is strategy. Potentially, you've created some risk management tools and templates in Excel that you like to use to quantify risk, for example, and calculate risk. Maybe you've created something like that. So these are the things that are there for the security architect. Because what do we do in our job? We manage risk. And do similar things. So if you think of the security architect as different than the security engineer, and you think of the security engineer is the doer, and the security architect is the planner, and in that security architect role, you're giving a presentation to the board, you're giving a presentation to the conference, you're writing a document to convince people why they should get away from role-based access control and migrate, for example, to context-aware IAM. Or you're writing a paper at a security provider, why you can't use those cloud native security tools, why they don't work multi-cloud, and why they're not strong enough compared to some of the more industrial tools to shape an industry. These are security architect things. If you don't know how to do these things, join us on one of our security architecture webinars. We run them constantly, where we'll talk about the exact skills. And before you even get to project ideas, you have to have the skills. So the skills, for example, are not the skills of an engineer. And I'll tell you what I mean. So let's look at the technical skills. A security architect doesn't configure a firewall. We don't configure an IDS, IPS system. We don't configure SIEM systems. We don't touch the tech. But what we do is a lot of risk management. So that means we have to identify assets, classify assets, catalog critical systems, catalog critical data, critical applications, what have you. We have to assess the risks to our organizations, evaluate threats, evaluate vulnerabilities. What is the impact should some threat be realized? We have to prioritize risk because we can't address all risks. There's no perfectly safe world. So we have to quantify the risks, see where the greatest risks and the impacts of those risks would be greatest on the business, and then make recommendations for the C-suite. We have to design controls or measures to mitigate risks. We have to create incident response plans, incident response procedures. We might even create a risk register. So think about creating some of that. Now, in our world, we don't configure an access list, but we do have to design for network security. So maybe we're designing where our firewalls need to be, or what kind of firewalls we need to use, or where our IDS, IPS system need to be. How are we going to segment or micro-segment the network? Are we segment it with VPCs? Are we segment it with VLANs? Are we further segmenting it with private VLANs? What kind of encryption are we using? Are we encrypting the headers? Are we encrypting the packets? What kind of traffic shaping, quality of service are we doing in the network to protect it? And then when we get out, because it's not like an engineer where we touch stuff, we have to think data security, whether we're classifying data or tokenizing it or obfuscating it, or think about what we can do, data privacy techniques like masking, or whether we're designing controls for access, or we're ensuring the data hasn't changed, that the integrity is there, or we're preventing data from exfiltrating the system. That's more thinking the work of an architect. It's not the how-to. So it's planning for data lifecycle management, for example. And it's planning what goes into an application security program. Do we get the people check each other's code? Do we do automated code checks? What kind of things need to go into application security? It's identifying it, documenting that, and communicating that, and building training plans to the organization around it. It's knowing what kind of IAM to use. When do you use a cloud access security broker, its strengths and weaknesses? When can we use the cloud provider's IAM? When do we need context-aware IAM? What do we gain or lose by federated IAM and single sign-ons? Because we gain and we lose. What are the trade-offs? What are the types of authentication mechanisms? That's what we're planning in security. And that's why I'm saying you can't be showing me how to build something. It doesn't work. We might be planning the physical security. Where do we put our fences, guards, dogs, fire suppression, emergency preparedness, things like fuels for a generator, first aid kit. We all get involved in that in security architecture. And then we're doing a lot of planning around cryptography, whether when to use symmetric and asymmetric, and where do we use digital signatures, what kind of cryptography has what strengths, what weaknesses, what's resistant to what kind of computing, and what do we do about it? How do we prevent those hashing attacks on the cryptographic system, for example? It's all about knowing framework. So for the architect, it's knowing how the underlying technology works, not how to build it, which is why nobody cares if you can build something as an architect, because it's not your job. They care what you can design and the impact of that's design for the paper. And I said that because what if I told you over 60% of the people go on an interview and fail immediately because they think that an architect is an engineer. And as soon as they talk about something they built instead of something they've designed, the interview's over and the person doesn't get hired. So I want you to really know what belongs in an architect portfolio and what we do as an architect to make sure you have those skills. Because there is such a shortage of security architect roles, you can get hired almost immediately with competing offers if you actually have the skills. But the problems is every employer says we have a sea of certified people. We have a sea of people that know how to build stuff, they know how to click stuff, but we can't find anybody that understands the trade-offs or the impact of one thing to another, how to manage risk, the security architect skills. Hope that's helpful, Harish. How can one become a CISO and a CIO thereafter? So, as it turns out, here's the real difference between the architects as you move up. The people that you see as solutions architects, they're generally a very junior role. That's why it was like Yvonne's first tech job after his waiter job, for example, or Pierre was a sailboat operator. Now he's working at LeaseWeb, or a Balwinder, who was a stay-at-home mom who went to Microsoft as a solutions architect. It's generally a fairly entry-level job when we look at the solutions architect role. Now, when we take that solutions architect role to bigger roles like a cloud architect or enterprise architect, what really changes? And it's those changes that I'm going to get you over here, Mustafa, that I want you to see. What changes is the focus and the impact. So when you're in a solutions architect role, you're trying to convince somebody to buy and use your stuff, like a sales rep. It's like a doctor that can only prescribe one Pfizer's medication and not use every drug made ever in the history of medicine to help your patient. So that's why it's usually such an intro level role. Now, how do you make that doctor better than the person that could only prescribe one drug? Well, you train them in other medical things. You teach them how to identify more conditions. You teach them about other medications and other things, and they start moving into, say, a cloud architect role. So it's a broader set of skills than I only know one vendor. Now, as we go from that cloud architect to that enterprise architect to that chief architect to the CIO role, what's really changing? Well, in all cases, from that solutions architect to that chief information officer, it's still strategy. We're creating the strategy for the business. But what happens is, as we get higher up the architectural food chain, as we get higher up the management structure, the skills of the people change dramatically. At the lower level, the solutions architect, 40% of their job focus is tech. And the other 60% is business, but their 40% of their job focus is tech. Now, here's the problem. When 40% of your job focus is tech, chances are you're going to miss a lot of the big picture. Because if half of your time is spent in the trenches, the rest of your time, you're going to miss what's going on around you. So that's really the key with that cloud architect role. It's about 70, the solutions architect role is about 60-40. When that person moves into a cloud architect role, it becomes about 75% business and about 25% tech. Now, at that point, how does somebody move into a bigger role? They get more business acumen, and they go from their $150,000 cloud architect role to their $300,000 cloud architect role. And then they move into a $500,000 enterprise architect or chief architect role and $1 million CIO role. What really changed? Well, the role became less and less technical and more business. The person focused less and less on tactical things that are in front of them and more about strategy. So as you start moving up executive roles, it's not about what you can do anymore. Those days are over. It's about what can your team do. So as you rise up through the architecture careers, it's based on your leadership and ability to build bigger teams, the ability to solve bigger problems, the ability to close billion-dollar architectures. And that's how people move into the big roles. Because if you're an architect and you're working on a $200 million architecture, the amount of strategy and coordination that architecture takes is definitely the equivalent of a CEO at a medium-sized business, meaning a business that's got, say, 1,000 people in it. You're already at that level. So at that point, it's just moving up the additional strategy levels already there. So, that's when you're really talking about business acumen, much more about executive presence, much more about leadership. And it followed the same path in my career. I had my first job as basically a network architect, and I was a solutions architect. I was a principal solutions architect. So I never really took any of the low-level architect jobs. I moved straight into that principal solutions architect job. And then for the most part, and then after that, I moved into the executive architect roles. And what changed? Well, I did a second MBA, and I received about $100,000 of executive training. And thankfully, my company paid for the majority of it. And that took me from regular architect roles all the way to chief architect roles, and that's how you move into the C-suite. All about your business acumen, all about the amount of business impact you can make, all about what you can get out of team as opposed to what you can do. So we almost, as leaders, all laugh about it. We basically go from our IQ as an individual contributor, like as an engineer, what we can do, to our EQ and what can we get the team to do. So that's the real difference. Know how to run a team, know how to lead a team, know how to create profit, know how to make a business better. That's the difference. And that's the difference between a $150,000 architect and $1 million enterprise architect too, or chief architect or CIO. Great question, Mustafa. Do architects work as a team comprising maybe 2 or 3? Does the number of cloud architects working for the size depends upon the company? So Adelika, I think we answered this one, but I'll answer it again. I've never worked on an architecture where there was less than 15 people that were working for me on my team. Never. So yes, you could be a junior architect with a 2 to 3 person team. Potentially speaking, yes, it's like an inter-level solutions architect, but you're going to be working as a cloud architect, typically with a team of many architects. And it's not just going to be cloud architects. You're going to have network architects, AI architects, data scientists, DevOps engineers. You're going to have a whole team of people, because each team of people are going to be different level experts. For example, someone like me that knows IP and networking, there's not that many of us in the world that know it at the level I do. But the people that know networking at the level I do don't know software. Like, you won't find most network architects that have any idea how to code. Or most architects would have no idea how to code, for that matter, for example. So if we've got a lot of things that require a lot of software development, we might want to bring in a software engineer and get their perspective, because it's not our skill. When it comes to security, if you're a network architect like me, you might not know security. So you might need to bring in a security architect. And if you're a network architect and a security architect, like I spent the beginning of my career, an enterprise architect later, guess what? I might need to bring in people from AI and data, and I do so all the time. So architecture is like the African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So you will always have an architecture team. And that's one of the hardest reasons it is to hire people. We need to hire people that can lead that team. And yeah, there are companies like JP Morgan Chase that have thousands of AI professionals, just AI people working there. And huge architecture teams. Great question. So what is before becoming a security architect and what's after? So here's the thing. Your first role, if you wanted to be, should be security architect. And the reason is, and I never understood this when I came into tech, everybody in tech thought, why don't I take somebody else's job? And that way I'm going to learn somebody else's job. And when I heard that, I was like, are you kidding me? I'm going to go learn how to be a flight attendant to fly an airplane? It never made any sense to me. So Delroy Batt, for example, you can see a video of him on our channel. He was an EMT, emergency medical technician, taking people back and forth to the hospital on ambulances. We trained him, and he got his first job as a security architect. Emmanuel M., who just got hired in the UK, his first job was a security architect. I mean, if you're trained for the job, you get the job you want. I never understood these things. Likewise, Al's first job was a senior architect over at Deloitte. Wallace Agana's first job was at JP Morgan Chase as an enterprise architect. Daniel Bosey was a 20-year-old high school dropout, and his first job after training with us was at JP Morgan Chase. So your first job as an architect is going to be there, because let's say you worked as a security engineer. You're still going to have to learn all new skills, because the architect job is so different than anybody else's job. So, Mustafa, if you think being an airplane pilot would help you be a great cloud architect, that's fine. You could take that strategy. But I would actually suggest that you would actually be more aligned by learning how to fly a plane. Because when you have to fly a plane, you have to consider the impact of wind, humidity, crosswinds, and etc. on your flight plan. And that involves thinking about a lot of different things, which is a lot of what we do as an architect. We actually create a plan. But what we don't do as an architect is actually fly the plane. So if somebody has experience, let's say they know a little bit of network security, they've configured routers and they've configured firewalls. So let's say they've worked as a network security engineer doing that, configuring routers and firewalls. That's great. Do you know what that will help them with? It was network security. And this is why there's no best background to be an architect, but you know what that will not help them with? And this is the most critical component. It won't help them with the tech of the architect job, and it won't help them with the non-technical components of the architect job. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. So if we actually look at the architect job and what we actually need to do, and what you need to know as an architect, let's look at the primary set of skills. 75% of the skills of the job as the architect, you'll be working with business strategists. So you're going to have to communicate to the C-suite. And I promise you, you won't learn that from engineering. Now, you would if you worked as a management consultant or a sales rep, but not from engineering. You are going to have to lead an architecture team of 15 to 50 people. And you know what you won't learn by configuring firewalls? How to lead an architecture team. Now, one thing that you'll have to do as an architect is manage stakeholders. You know, speaking to the business unit's head and the key stakeholders from various business units. Guess what you won't do as an engineer? You won't have any of those skills. Now, you will if you're a sales rep. You will if you're a management consultant, which is why they're usually the easiest people to get these jobs. But you won't have them as an engineer. Now, guess what you don't typically get as an engineer? Very strong communication skills, but you'll need them to be an architect. The last part of an interview for a security architect job is generally a presentation to a board of people. And you are going to need great presentation skills. And you know what you won't have from engineering? Any presentation skills. So it doesn't matter where you start. Now, what you will need as an architect is the executive presence to walk in and command the room. And I promise you, you won't get that. And what you will also need is all of these technology things. You will need, well, before we get there, well, you need vendor management knowledge. You'll need how to negotiate and things like that. So those are the skills you won't know. But let's say you know network security. Here's what you probably won't know. Data security, things like data classification and data controlling access, data loss prevention, encryption, because people that work on the network don't work on data. And the people that worked on the network, guess what they still won't know? Application security, code checks, input validation, what goes into application security. And the people that know network security, they still won't know IAM and federated IAM and cloud access security brokers and what kinds of authentication. They won't know any of it. And you know what else they won't know? They won't know physical security fences, guards, dogs, fire, any of it. They won't know security frameworks. They won't know cryptography. The only thing they'll know is the one domain. Now, why did I say that? So I took an engineer, let's say that engineer has 10 years experience. Of the 100 skills, maybe the engineer knows one of them. Now let's take a sales rep, which is why someone like Jermaine got hired in about 6 months from my program. Or why Wallace Agana's first job, I was an enterprise architect, and he skipped all these architects. And why Nafuli's first job was a CTO over there in the UK after trying our program. What was different about them? Why Al's first job was a senior solutions architect over at Deloitte. They were in sales, and you know what they knew how to do? They knew how to manage stakeholders. They knew how to give a presentation. They knew how to sell. They knew how to lead a team. They knew how to quantify an opportunity. They knew how to build a business relationship, and they knew how to communicate. So the sales rep has about 50% of the skills of the architect. But, I mean, I've got lots of people like Camille, who was a nurse. She left our program. She's a director of architecture. Someone, Nicole, was a teacher, and she's an architect. Vladimir was a 24-year-old college student before we got him hired. It really just doesn't matter. So what role is before the architect? Nothing. Any role you want it to be. No, what role is after the security architect? Well, you can become a principal security architect. You could go the other route and go into the business direction, like an enterprise architect. You could focus on becoming a chief information security officer. You could focus on becoming a chief information officer. So you really could do anything you want with these. But I really don't want you to think that there's any role that's going to prepare you for an architect role other than an architecture role. Because 99% of the jobs out there are doing roles. Engineer is a doing role. A nurse is a doing role. A physician is a planning role. They write the orders on the chart, and the nurses carry it out. The architect is a planning role. This is the architectural blueprint. Engineers go build it. So I hope that makes sense. So afterwards, I'd focus on business acumen. I'd focus on leadership. I'd focus on executive presence. I'd focus more on sales. And quite frankly, I would do what I did. Move into enterprise architect roles, then chief architect roles, and then the C-suite. That's what I would do, Mustafa. But I wanted you to show why there was nothing that's really a good background into these roles. Because there's really very few things that prepare people for strategy roles. Because strategy is different than doing. So I hope that really helps and makes that sense, Mustafa, because I really want the best for you. How does one go about becoming an AI solutions architect? What skills do they require? So, and will you need to learn how to do proof of concept? So first, let me address the proof of concept, because tomorrow I'm going to run a webinar and I'm going to cover every skill. I will also tell you a little bit about the skills you need to know today in case you can't come, but let me talk about the proof of concept. Here's what an architect does in a proof of concept. You don't build anything. What we do as an architect, at least an architect that cares about their career, we go and we scope out the architecture. We determine what the key performance indicators for the proof of concept need to be. What do we need to prove to the client? Is it that the technology works? Is it that the technology is cheaper? Is it that the technology performs better? So the first part is we have to scope the proof of concept to see what we're trying to prove. Then what we need to determine is how big of a proof of concept we need to use. How big of a model, how big of a scale do we need to try to get these things to its goal? So that's going to be absolutely critical for that. So then what we have to do is we have to build our proof of concept team. Who's going to be there on that team? Who are the engineers that are going to build it? Who's that critical escalation point that you go to? If those engineers are having a hard time, you smile with the face, you escalate it, you get some money with somebody with power and influence behind the scenes to help your implementation engineers on this proof of concept do it. Now, on this proof of concept, if it's on site, you're going to be there. You're going to buy your proof of concept engineers lunch and dinner. When things don't break, you're going to take the client to dinner, get them outside of the environment so your engineers can work with their engineers behind the scenes. You're going to be bringing in dinner and drinks, and you're basically going to be the in-house psychologist for your proof of concept engineers because they work really, really, really hard. And they don't get paid anywhere near as much like an architect does. So they're working hard. At the end of the day, things are breaking and it's a frustrating job for them. So you're going to be spending a lot of time trying to take care of your proof of concept team to get that team to their goals. And that's really what you're going to be doing. Now, what are the skills to be an architect? Well, the skills to be an architect, and you can learn them, are going to be as follows. First, we have a document in the description of this video on what you need to do to become an AI architect and learn. And Chris from my team can drop that link in the chat box for you. And if you come to my webinar tomorrow, not only will you speak to me, but you'll speak with David Lethicum. I've only worked with AI since 2001. So I only have 24 years experience with AI, but most of my experience is in network architecture. But David Lethicum's been working on AI since 1985. In fact, he did so much work in the early 80s, it landed him a job at NASA in the 90s again on AI, and he's been working with AI ever since in nearly every architecture he's worked with. So he's going to be there too. He's constantly hiring AI architects and things like that. So I hope it'll help. But what is it the skills that you honestly need? The majority of the skills are business skills because you've got to ask the right questions to the client, lead the architecture teams, deliver your architecture presentation, manage a group of stakeholders, creating a governance structure, creating the cultural change. So this is a big soft skills, business skills kind of job, which is why it pays so well, because it's so hard to find people that understand technology for some reason and have really good business and leadership skills. So there is that. But it's also then more of a design role. So it takes a different set of skills to design a building than it takes to build the building. And where people go wrong in their architecture career is they say, I'm going to learn how to build it. But unfortunately, learning how to build doesn't teach you how to design. And that's why all the world's greatest skyscrapers are not designed by the people that build them. That's why the shopping malls, like the Mall of America, or I went to some beautiful mall in Dubai, they're designed by architects, not engineers. And the people that design them don't know how to build them at all. They have no idea where to begin. So understand it's a different set of skills. So that AI architect is going to have to understand the underlying technology, whether it be the network, the storage, the compute, what have you. And then they're going to have a huge focus knowledge on AI. And AI is really how are we designing these things, not how do we build them. What is the impact of this change versus this change? What are the benefits that we gain by using a small language model versus a large language model? So really the focused areas of expertise for an AI architect that are not the business skills are typically databases and training data, knowing a lot about inference engines, for example, knowing about your AI model, what kind of AI models your team should be building, how you would train your models, how you would test your AI models, how you would secure your AI models, kind of what goes into operations, what have you. Can you keep that in the back of your mind? That's kind of what we do. But come tomorrow and we will really go into it. And we're going to spend an hour on it. And this is really a great program. A great thing to learn. Alan Jackson, any advice on staying focused and how to measure practice? Oh, Alan, yes. So for me, there's two things. One is I will tell you that you may, and you know me, Alan, since you're in the program, and I know you've got access to some of the things that we do. I will tell you whether it was martial arts or yoga or meditation, I have to get that in each day. I have to. But for me, anytime I do something, what I focus on is my why. It's always the why. Why do I want to do something? And when I look at something, because there's an opportunity cost of your time, you can only spend your time in one place. So what I figure out is, what do I want to do most? So when I figure out what I want to do most, what I try to do is figure out, then build my plan. And I know we worked with you on building a plan. What do I need to do? And I know how hard you work, because you've got a couple things more going on than the other person. So what I try to do is I try to chip away at it just a little at a time, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. But what I also remember is, for me, whenever it's hard, and I know things that are hard. I can tell you, I'm coming back from spine surgery, and let me tell you, that's hard. But whether it's waking up out of bed when everything hurts, whether it's trying to stand when everything hurts, whether it's doing PT when everything hurts, or whether it's studying something that gives you a headache but is still your passion, but you want to study it until you get a headache because you got there. First, determine your why. Now, I can tell you, since you're with us, I would definitely be spending time in the community. I would definitely be working with people. And I would, kind of like the SEALs call it, their swim buddy. I would find your swim buddy, your battle buddy, whatever the places where people work, talk at. And I'd make sure you two do things together. And the two of you don't let each other fail. And I know we've got lots of swim buddies that you could find in our program. The next thing to do is, what I like to do is I like to break down every giant thing. And like we taught you, into specific, measurable, achievable, results-oriented, time-based goals. And at least for me personally, I create my list, I build my plan, and every time I have a victory, I find some mini way to celebrate it. I don't care what it is. If I go out, I have a martini with my wife. I don't drink a lot, so if I have a martini or two, it's a massive celebration. I do that a couple times a year, but maybe that was a big thing. I do something that'll just remind me it's a celebration, and then the next day I try to go straight back to the next thing. But it's all what's in you, and it doesn't matter what your reward is. It really doesn't matter what it is. I used to I used to try to do a special workout every time I achieved something big to prove to me I could achieve something bigger. But whatever it really is, just find some celebration inside you, some way to actually celebrate it, and then go back to it. But the key to remember, if your why is strong, and if your why is really strong, what you can achieve is almost impossible. And I'm telling you, when I told everybody back when the CCI exam was 9 months and I was going to pass that within 9 months of deciding I was going to learn networking, the world laughed at me. But I'll tell you what I did the next day. I broke it up into all the things that were on the list into a management problem. And I said, okay, so I've got to learn this protocol. I have 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 to learn this protocol. And then I built as a plan, okay, this one was done by this date, this one was done by this date, this one was done by this date, this one was done by this date. 6 months into it, I felt I had the skills to get hired. So I got my first job as a senior engineer, and within a couple months was promoted to lead architect. 3 months after that, I passed the CCI and moved on to a principal architect role, and it was done. But the key is to just stay in it. And, Alan, your life is a little more challenging than most. I know where you're at. I know sometimes you work a couple of different jobs, but just stay at it. Every time there's a new architecture project, you keep coming to class, find your swim buddy, and don't quit until the day you're hired. And I mean it. And I don't care with your life. I don't care if it takes you a lot longer. I just want you to finish because I know the impact it will make on you. So stay at it, but you have to know along the way, and I know you've taken a lot of hits in your life. You can do it. I know you can do it. And I know how worth it it'll be when you're there. So always keep the reward in the end. Keep the end in mind, and that's why your why is so important. Because if your why is strong and your fight is strong, you'll be there. But please, start interacting more with the community. You'll find that swim buddy. Great question, Alan. And I'm thrilled to see you here. You're currently in a small bank. This is good. They've made some heavy investment into improving their IT hiring executives to lead digital transformation. Excellent. Sounds like you need to be there. Do you think it would be a good opportunity for becoming an architect at the company? I would definitely talk to them, Alan. I would definitely talk to them. Definitely. Might require a quite careful discussion with them, but I definitely would. I'm like, what is the work relationship between different architects, like competitive, friendly, or combative? So that's up to you. And what I mean by that is how you actually feed these relationships will determine how good they are. As a rule, most relationships, if you're good with people, if you've got the right soft skills, the right communication skills, the right leadership skills, they're going to be very smooth. Now, the reason it's mostly going to be smooth is you're a $200,000 person, they're a $200,000 person, and at that point, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 people, they just don't want to lose their jobs. And they know there's an expectation in these jobs of what you can say, what you cannot say, what you can do, what you cannot do, what kind of complaints you can make, what kind of complaints, how negative you can speak versus when it's possible versus when it's not. And there's going to be a lot of things and poker faces and everything else at this level. So it's generally going to be fairly good. Now, where does it tend to get bad? And where does it take the most soft skills? Well, it's usually here. So when someone like me gets called in, or someone like David Lithicum gets called in, typically speaking, by the time they bring us, someone like us in, or even a Russ White or anybody in these big architecture roles gets brought in, it's usually because the customer made some pretty terrible mistakes. They invested a fortune in technology and it either broke something or they got nothing out of it. The chief information officer got fired, and now you're there. So now you've got architects that made a whole lot of bad design decisions, and now you're there to fix it. So here's the key. I've walked into these situations and everybody's protective and everybody's so worried about the decisions they made. And when I walk in there, I just say, tell me how we got here. How can I help? We're all here to be part of the same team. We clearly had some technology challenges. It's fine. Your CEO asked me to have these discussions. What can we do and how can we do it together? Now, when we ask people how they came on decisions and we ask their rationale. So when the person says, well, we made this decision, this decision, this decision, and this decision, and you can come back to that person and say, I see how you could get there. I can see from a logic perspective, this and this and this. While it makes sense, unfortunately, this is really the challenge, not this. I could see how you would do it, but let's talk about how we solve this problem. That's usually a fairly congenial thing. Because you're not blaming someone, you're not asking them, and usually there's a good logic between somehow people made the decision. It was just the wrong decision because they usually solved the wrong problem. Now, I have actually been in an environment where I found one or two people that weren't typically fairly decent to work with. And for the most part, I usually address it. For example, I can tell you at one point, I had worked with the sales rep that I was part of an architecture with. And as soon as I had actually bought a new house in another state, and they knew I was moving to the new house in a big promotion in the company and totally unrelated to the past job. And I remember being with this very large global bank where I was their solutions architect. And all of a sudden the sales rep stopped. I'd go to the customer. I'd call the sales rep. He didn't call me back. I'd go to the customer. Sales rep called me back. So instead, I noticed it was getting there. I sent a very simple email. Chris, we need to talk, and I'm going to meet you at this time. Actually, it wasn't Chris. It was Tony. Sorry, I'm sorry, mixing up people. It's been too many years thinking about it. And what I said to this person is we need to talk. Now, I had a drink with this person, and I spoke to this person. I was very clear, and I said, look, I'm calling you because the strategy of your client for the next 2 years is going to be dependent upon these decisions we're making right now. I see you have a choice. Would you like to be in these decisions? Because you own the account and you own the strategy of the account, or do you want to not return my phone calls and I'm going to make the decision that I think is best for the client with or without your guidance? Now, this sales rep perked up fairly quickly, didn't realize the impact of what he was saying. And then I said, oh, by the way, here's the sales opportunity you missed. Are you interested? And the person realized how they act and they went on to do fairly well. And it's fine. So there was that one time. I also remember at one point in my life, I had gone in there and there was an architect that didn't think they needed to understand business. and the company had invested a lot and they didn't need anything. And it was the kind of thing, and the architect said, I am not speaking to the executives. And I said, well, if you're not willing to speak to the executives, you're not going to get to the strategy. And the architect says, business things don't matter. And I said, could you explain to me how business things don't matter? And he gave me some garbage tech stuff. And at that point, and this was one of the few, this was probably the only time I've had to do it in my career, I basically had a conversation with the person and said, are you willing to learn the business? Because right now, every architecture that's come out of this company has not worked. The person said, I refuse to lose business. So I managed him out of the business. And sometimes you have to do that too. But all in all, I can say that I've had less than 5 conflicts over 30 years as an architect. And as long as you don't try to go out of your world, don't try to convince people you know more things than you don't, go out there and treat people right, go out there and try to bring out the best in others, go in there with a calm attitude, I don't really see a lot of conflict, because remember, the architect job is a soft skills job. It is a finesse job. And if you have the finesse to be in one of these roles, chances are you're not going to have these kinds of conflicts. So it's been mostly friendly for me. Chris, let's go to the next one. Hi, Mike. AI is the new thing, but the AI architect needs to understand it well. How to master AI without showing you are a techie person? So let's talk about the difference between the way a techie person talks about AI and the way an architect talks about AI. So the techie person talks about RAG versus something else. The architect does not have that conversation as a general rule. The architect has the conversation and proves it that, for example, let's say we were talking to an organization, and that organization was known to have horrible customer satisfaction scores, specifically in their call centers. That they had problems with tier 1 of their call center, meaning the first people that call, and even tier 2. And by the time they escalated something to tier 3, the person at that call center was basically a supervisor. They knew how to solve problems and everybody was happy. But on average, it took 14 calls to get to somebody that could actually help the person. Now, this is a very common thing in a bad call center. Now, if I can walk into AI, if I can walk into an organization and I can communicate to an executive and say, I understand you're having some challenges with your call center. I also understand that your biggest problems is with your level 1 and your level 2 calls. Now, when we looked through your customer satisfaction surveys, what we were finding was that people were complaining of competency, lack of clarity in the way they communicated, and in responses that were completely irrelevant. We believe that we can replace that tier 1 and tier 2 that's performing so poorly with less than 15% customer satisfaction with AI. And by replacing that tier 1 at minimum with AI, we believe we'll be able to resolve 80% of things directly by the AI, all in less than 3 minutes or less, keeping the customers happy. Now, if we save the costs on AI by getting rid of the tier 1 people, we can now reinvest in more of your tier 3 people. So either they have the AI responded, and if the AI can't respond, then we can definitely get 3 to 4 times the customer satisfaction rate you're getting with AI than what you're getting now. And then we can send everybody that after they've gone through their 5 or 10 minutes with AI directly to a tier 3 person. You won't have those customer satisfaction problems. Now, when we've analyzed other organizations like that, Andy, and we've improved their customer service by 22%, we've noted their sales increases by about 4%. And 4% revenue for your business would be the equivalent of $300 million per quarter in additional net income. That's how you prove that you understand AI. Because you have to remember that you're the architect, not the engineer. Now, again, if you're having a conversation with someone and you're saying, well, we can look at small language models versus large language models. Now, a large language model typically is something that encompasses the entire internet, which means it encompasses the good and bad. For example, if we want healthcare, it can look at the Harris Guide to Internal Medicine, New England Journal of Medicine, but unfortunately, it's going to get the goofy people from Reddit and forums that don't know anything that are going to be answering each other's questions. So we're going to get lots of information, some great, some poor, and somewhere in between. Now, in order to calculate that, in order to run that, we're going to take a lot more training time, which means more compute cycles, more cost, what have you. Now, if we went with the small language model, we have the ability to train it on exactly the right subset of the data. So we don't have any of the garbage data. We also have the ability to do it at a lower cost. But we lose this. So we gain this, we lose this. Andy, that's architect language. That's showing you know architecture things. And that's the exact opposite discussion than someone that says, I know how to write a Python script or an R script or something like that. That's what you do because you're showing what the technology can do. I mean, I can remember having lots of conversations with executives and internet service providers talking about how we could apply this new type of edge device that could add voice, data, and video instead of just data and triple the revenue opportunities. And talked about how we could create a strategy to do that and what it would take to upgrade the network to do that. That's the same architecture thing. So don't talk about anything that you would see and say an AWS certification, and you won't sound like an engineer. Make sure you talk about the technology, what the technology can do, how the technology can solve a problem, the limitations of the technology, the strengths and weaknesses, and what people need to do to be successful. And the world, Andy, will see you as an architect, and they will know exactly what your skill is. Showing technical competency and job competency without being seen as techie and failing the interview because of techiness, which is a sad thing to see, but I see it all the time. You love tech and networking. I love networking too, and to some degree tech as well. Is as much at the same time, but at the same time, you like aligning people, business, and processes. So, you know, Andy, that's a tough one. And I'm going to tell you what I do. So I don't like to admit this very often. I love playing with tech stuff. I don't like to admit it, and I had to hide it because it literally crushed my career. So at one point, I had to take the CCIA and the CISSP off of my business cards once I reached that executive level management asked me to. But I still love tech. So what do? Andy, I actually have a 10-server OpenStack cloud that I kind of experiment with if I ever want to have a little fun with, for example. And that way I can play with my little tech stuff if I've got a couple hours here or there. I want to experiment. I've got some RTX 4090s for some AI things that might be kind of cool for fun. But then in my career, I focus on what really matters. And I just use this as a hobby thing. So instead of playing golf, I might be playing with some kind of tech thing. But I really, the key to focus on your career is focus on the real things that matter. The business acumen, the leadership, the driving real business results. But what if you like some kind of tech and you want to be an architect? There's nothing wrong with going down the principal or distinguished architect path. So I did it early in my career. I moved into the principal solutions architect path. And what was my background? What did I really focus on? Predominantly IP multicast, because there was only a few of us in the world that knew it. And it was the enabling technology of video and a lot of banking stock feeds. And it was just one of those things that I was just fascinated by when I saw it. It's like some people just have a natural aptitude to something. And I looked at this thing and said it was the coolest thing. So I focused on that tech for a while in a principal architect role because it was kind of a tech specialist. And there was nothing wrong with it. I had it. I did it. I loved it. Now, I will tell you there was a point, Andy, where it was very clear that was killing my career and I couldn't move forward. And at that point, I made the decision, do I stay in this tech specialist, subject matter expert, principal architect role, or do I take a new challenge and start focusing more on strategy and leading more teams and focus more on business skills? And I knew it would get me to earn more, and I knew it would double my salary, but I didn't know if I was going to like it. And I can tell you, I wasn't sure whether I was going to go into that enterprise architect role or staying at that network architect role because I loved it so much. And then I had my first enterprise architect role. And when I got to see the impact of the change I could make, when I got to see when I started focusing on the big picture and focusing on the process and focusing on how employees did their job or focused on how customers experienced it. That, to me, that was like the big light bulb that went off and said, oh, this is a strategy game. And I just found that, when I was young, I just loved chess because it was a strategy game. I wasn't big on checkers, but as a kid, I loved chess. And it was the same kind of thing. And it was like, okay, this is just incredible for me. It was fun for me. So it's that. But honestly, Andy, and I know you're really capable, really smart. And honestly, I think you could do whatever you like. So if you want to have some fun with the tech side, like a principal architect, go ahead and do it. Want to have some fun on the business side? I say go fun and do it. What do you want to do, Andy? Because I know you, and I know no matter what it is, you'll be successful. But I'd say just do what you love, because you can. Hi, Mike. How do you comment on a cloud architect position requiring knowledge of Terraform CI/CD tools? So here's the thing. There are many jobs masquerading as architect jobs. And I actually got one when I was younger, where they have an architect title, but there's actually no architecture in the job. And that happens very frequently. Now, I'll tell you which architects might touch the technology in the real world and which won't. So the reason whenever you see a job that includes CI/CD stuff and tools, it's not an architect job, is because you won't be able to do any of the architect things. Now, what happens in these roles? They're design engineer roles, and they do a little bit of technical design, but they don't do any real design because they're not speaking to the C-suite. They're not learning the executive's needs. They're not learning the key business processes. They're not learning what's necessary. They're not focusing on the cultural change. They're not building the business case. They're not creating that team. They're not mapping out roadmaps. They're not performing risk analysis or any kind of assessment. So there's no architecture in those jobs. Now, if you look at these jobs, and this is like you may see for a cloud architect job. Now, for example, and then there'll be other jobs where you might touch the technology, and let me explain to them. You might be an application architect. Now, an application architect is not a cloud architect. They're responsible for the design of an application. So they might occasionally look at an API or something. Not often, but they might. But that is an application architect. The same way a network architect would focus on what the network looks like in a much more specific thing than a cloud architect. But in any time where you touch the technology, there's just no architecture there. It's 100% engineering. And that's why the jobs where you touch the technology often pay a few $100,000 or 100,000 US less than an actual architect job, because you can't fly the plane and keep people in the seats. It's funny. Many years ago, I got a job offer and it was relatively good, but it wasn't great. But it was early in my architecture career. And it was for a very large company. They hired me to be a network solutions architect, a solutions architect in networking. And I was excited. So I was like, okay, I took it because, I liked the title, wasn't sure what it was. They offered me a good pay. And when I walked in on the first day, the manager said to me, Mike, I just wanted to let you know, we're not really hiring an architect here. We just couldn't figure out a way to how to pay a CCIE like you enough, so we called it an architect job. I want you to do design engineering, and also I'm going to have you implement some things. I said, it was nice to meet you. Thank you for the opportunity. I walked out the door, and 3 days later, I took a principal 2 architect job at Comcast, where, of course, I didn't touch the technology. So I'm not saying they don't exist, but these are low-paying jobs by comparison to the architect jobs, and there's absolutely zero architecture in it. Now, why do we get in this problem, DoorDash? We get in this problem because I want to hire a cloud architect. And when I want to hire a cloud architect, here's ultimately what happens. I decide I want to hire someone, so I call human resources, or I fill out the human resources form. Now, human resources decides to write the job description for the architect role. Now, I'm going to ask you this question. Could you write the job description for a cardiothoracic surgeon? Would you know what to put on there? Of course not. Well, HR is now doing the equivalent of that. They're writing a job description about a job that they have no idea what it is. And then as you go past that, you actually can see why these job descriptions are silly. Now, it's so bad because, in architects, cloud architect roles, we don't touch the technology, that Gartner started seeing these same ridiculous job descriptions that I saw. And they know full well that cloud architects don't touch the technology. They don't code, they don't configure, they don't do DevOps, they don't do any of it. So they actually asked the chief information officers, which are our boss, what do you want in a cloud architect? And Chris, you can feel free to publish this article if you want in the chat box. And they said they wanted someone that could lead the cultural change for cloud adoption. Well, that means meeting with the executives, getting their buy-in, meeting with stakeholders, getting their buy-in, creating the culture necessary for change, the marketing collateral, the training collateral, etc. So that was the first thing they said. And then the CIO said, well, we want someone to develop and coordinate the cloud architecture. Well, when you hear David Lithicum or I talk about leading an architecture team of 15 to 50 people and going back and forth with stakeholders, that's what it is. And then when they said develop a cloud strategy and coordinate the adoption process. So that's really the reality. Our hybrid multi-cloud strategies are the strategies we use in 98% of all enterprises. That's Oracle's data. Now, when they said, what else do you want your cloud architects to do? They said, find talent with the necessary skills. You may wonder why I've interviewed 6,000 people in my career. Assess application software and hardware. Create a cloud broker team. Establish best practices for the cloud across the company. Select cloud providers and vet third-party services, oversee governance and mitigate risk, work closely with IT security people to monitor privacy and develop incident response procedures, manage budgets that estimate cost and operate at scale. So the CIOs are telling you that's what they want. And that's what you will do. And if you work at an Apple, and Amazon, a Cisco, Google, an IBM, Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, Capgemini, a PricewaterhouseCoopers, a JP Morgan Chase Bank, any company, you won't be allowed to touch the technology. So I'm not denying that there's certain job descriptions that have it, but it's an incorrect job description. It'd be like I have a cat, Cindy. She's a beautiful cat. If I called her a dog, she'd still be a cat. She'd still, lick herself. She'd still groom herself. She'd still be able to jump like 8 feet in the air. She'd still, do all the things the cats would do because she's a cat, even if I called her a dog. So it's just a mistitled opportunity because if you know any architect working at these companies, we're not even allowed to touch it. Hi, sir. You just graduated college a week ago. You're planning to take the Solutions Architect Associate exam. Is it a good decision for you as a fresher to take this certification? So, Sudine, what you're going to have is marketable skills. And out of school, you're still going to have to get these skills. So what career are you interested in, Sudine? And if you tell me what career you're interested in, because we can't be looking for fresher jobs because they don't exist. And you can see articles and videos I made years ago as to why they don't exist. Because the jobs were racking and stacking servers, basically installing an operating system. All those jobs have been mitigated by DevOps, cloud computing, and AI. So let us know the job you want, and then we can get you there. Now, I'm going to also suggest you come to one of our webinars, and that way you can hear the skills of the future. But the Solutions Architect Associate is a vocabulary test. That's all it is. It's a vocabulary test of what the AWS marketing people chose to call the same network and data centers services we've used for 30 years and how to configure them. The problem is I don't need to hire anybody to configure these things because I can use AI to do it, or I can have one DevOps engineer replace hundreds of engineers by writing an infrastructure as code script. I need you to determine when not to use the thing that you were taught in your AWS certification. Why you can't use half of the things that are in your certifications, and what happens if you do in the real world. Being able to evaluate this one versus this one. Being able to make a judgment that says, well, this is convenience, but we lose the security with this option. To say, well, this option is convenient, but we don't have as much compute power, which means performance is going to degrade. This option is simpler, but we've got some latency. Which do we want? So that's there. So the key is, what do you want to do? Because collecting certifications by itself is going to do nothing for you. The certifications are what I call branding. So realistically speaking, there are 5 steps to getting a job. Step 1 is developing the skills for the job you want. Step 2 is becoming what the hiring manager wants, because 90% of the people fail the interview on not having the soft skills that the hiring manager want, which is why we focus so heavily on that with the program. Third is giving a portfolio that shows that you are what you are. So an engineer's portfolio and an architect's portfolio are completely different. Show me an engineering portfolio and an architect interview, and you already failed the interview because I know you don't even know what an architect is. show me an architect interview for an engineering job, and I'm going to say you're not technical enough because it's a different career. So it's that. Then after you have the skills, after what the hiring manager wants, and then you have the portfolio, that's when you do your certifications, because your certifications won't teach you anything other than the name of something and technician skills, but nobody's going to hire you for that. So that's when you do your certifications. That's when you do your resume. That's when you do your branding. And then after that, you prepare for the interview and you train for the interview, because almost 98% of the people fail the interview. So get the interview training you need to be successful. So after you have the skills, then you do the certifications, but not before, because they're meaningless by themselves. They'll get you in an interview, but they're not enough to get hired. So skills first, certification second. Chris, let's go to the next question. Mike, from my experience, can I explain the difference between a security architect, a solutions architect, and a sales engineer? Sure, I'll even map them out. And I'll really show you the difference, because there are differences here. So, and I'll show you why we'll work our way from junior to senior. So at the top of this, we're going to have the security architect. And why? So the security architect is responsible for, say, the security strategy. So that means risk management, it means network security, it means identity, application security, physical security, everything the security is responsible for. So that is the security architect. Now, the solutions architect, let's say we've got a solutions architect in security. Here's what they are for. We're going to add some solutions architect in here. So here we've got the security architect, and let's say this person is responsible for the entire security architecture for the organization. Now, what's going to happen is we're going to need products and services, right, to secure our infrastructure. Of course we will. So what'll happen is we'll be reaching out to various security vendors, and they'll be sending us an account team. And the account team will be a sales rep, and sometimes a solutions architect, and sometimes a sales engineer. But we'll get to the subtle differences. So the solutions architect is going to help design, present, and sell this stuff to me. So the solutions architect, I like to think of it as a one-trick pony, and I've been a solutions architect before, because here a security architect can use any product and any service in the entire world to secure their customer's environment. Here, you're only allowed to use the stuff Cisco makes. Here, you're only allowed to use the stuff Palo Alto makes. And here you use the stuff that Fortinet makes. So this is like a doctor that can only prescribe one of the medications, where this is a doctor that can use every surgical technique and every medication in the entire world. This is someone that could use Merck's drugs or only Pfizer's drugs, what have you. So you can see this, Joel, is much more pre-sales. This is more strategic. So the solutions architect job is a design, present, and sell job. So you're meeting clients, you're developing a relationship with clients, you're giving client presentations, you're doing occasional executive briefings, you're responding to RFIs, RFPs, RFQs, etc. So this role itself, if we get to it, and here's the key, this is about 60% business, and there's a reason I'm doing this, and about 40% tech. But this is still tech strategy, generally speaking, not how to. Now, this job looks awfully similar to the sales engineer job. But there's a subtle difference. The solutions architect is a more business oriented job. So you're expected to be less technical. You're expected to be more salesy. You're expected to be more leadership. You're expected to give a better presentation. You're expected to be a little smoother, entertaining clients. And you're expected to be a bigger picture focus. Now, the sales engineer is typically a little rougher around the edges. They typically are a little more techy. And they, of course, obviously have resources that they can go to, too, like the consulting systems engineers that could be their sales engineers when they need help. Whereas we as solutions architects might be going to sales engineers, consulting systems engineers, and other architects for help. Now, the sales engineer role pays a little less than this role, and typically less than this role, because this is more techy. So let's look at the subtle differences. The sales engineer might actually build the technology for a proof of concept. The security architect is going to have a team of engineers build it for them. They're going to scope the proof of concept. They're going to determine what needs to be proved, quantify it. A good solutions architect is going to do that. So the sales engineer may touch the technology, hence it's the lowest pay. The solutions architect, depending upon where they work, if it's on sales and they sell a lot, can earn a lot. But typically speaking, this is the biggest role. Because solutions architect, single vendor solutions. Now, where the security architect uses it all. And the sales engineer, account manager, sales engineer is what some companies use. Other companies use a technical account manager and a solutions architect. So it's just the model that they use. But solutions architect, they're really the most junior roles, and that's why so many people get them as their first tech job that we train. For example, Jeffrey, whose first job was a solutions architect at Kalian, or Arun's, whose first tech job was he was working at Home Depot in a non-tech role before we trained him, and his first role was a solutions architect, but now he's in much bigger cloud architect roles, for example. Or Lenny, who is our video editor, who's now working at Citrix as a solutions architect. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. I'm like, what are the chances of going from IT support to cloud security architect in a single leap? Easy, if you're well trained. I mean, I got a high school dropout, Daniel, and you can see his video, a job at JP Morgan Chase. This is his first tech job ever at 20 years old. You can see that. But what does it's not, it has nothing to do with what you've done in your past life. Nothing, zero. It's only what your skills are in the future. For example, Jennifer's first job was a solutions architect at JP Morgan Chase. Now, she had a lot of the skills. She was a mental health tech, so she had a lot of emotional intelligence, a lot of communication skills, a lot of leadership skills. I mean, Balliner was a stay-at-home mom. I mean, Richard was in the fraud department of a bank, not tech, and his first job was a cloud architect after we trained him. So Coyote's first tech job after college was a solutions architect over at AWS. So there's no problem taking you from help desk to solutions architect. Just like there's no issue taking me from practicing internal medicine to senior network engineer in a single hop and lead architect within 3 months. You just need the right training. But if you get the right training, it'll be easy for you. But you just have to realize it's a different job. Now, the reality is some of what you learned is going to be applicable. I bet you learned how to ask questions. I bet you learned how to take people that were frustrated, make them a little calmer. I bet you developed some emotional intelligence. Take those skills with you and then just learn the rest. Great questions, Armand. Maybe come to any of our webinars. We can talk personally. I'd love to speak with you, but I'm sure is all you have to do is learn the right skills and you'll have many, many, many opportunities. And I love this question that Alex actually asked. And it is one of these questions that we have to spend a lot of time on, and it shows why we need to actually answer this question. But before we do, if you have any last questions, please get them in. I have to leave by 4, but if you get any questions in, I'll do my best to stay upwards of 4. And then Chris, bring that question in. If you don't touch the tech, how do you become a subject matter expert or show your work at the same time? Alex, I'm so glad you asked that question. Now, what if I told you that you showed me how you built something and I said, so what? Because it has nothing to do with what you actually do as an architect, and I don't care what you built. And I literally mean I don't care what you built because it doesn't show me that you know anything. So, for example, I like to take, so let's say that if I asked you, and this is how you show your work, Alex, could you talk to me about the weaknesses in cloud security and why that demands a new security paradigm like zero trust? Now, my expectation is you can talk to me about the cloud weaknesses. You can talk to me about the shared infrastructure. You can talk about if, say, the FBI were to subpoena one customer's and took the other customer's hard drive where they might be capturing your data at the same time. You could talk to me about the laws of the cloud provider accidentally replicating its information to another country. You can talk to me about the weak perimeters in there, and I know you know that. But what is the architect versus the engineer? If you show me you built something, you showed me you're the equivalent of a construction worker. Now, by comparison, if you created a thought leadership document, which is what architects do, and you showed me how you can shape an industry, AI solutions for airlines, how you can reduce, optimize scheduling, how you can reduce fuel, how you can buy fuel things cheaper, that's something that's subject matter expert work as an architect, and you're not going to get it by building it. Now, if I asked you if you created content on how to provide a cloud WAN, network architectures for the cloud, you're showing me subject matter expertise, because in order to create that WAN, you're going to have to show me your BGP peering points. You're going to have to explain the route complexity, where your route aggregation is. That's solutions architecture. And guess where you don't learn that? By building anything. And where it always comes down is whenever somebody comes to me and they said, Mike, I've been a cloud engineer for 10 years. Can I just become an architect? And I say, no. And here's the reason why. I say, I see that you built that web server. Great. And Alex, let me show you what happens when someone says, Mike, I'm interested in a solutions architect role. I set up a WordPress website. And here's the questions I say. Okay, you set up a WordPress website. Well, first you showed me that you don't know what architecture is, but just in case, let me ask you some architectural questions. Could you tell me how you sized that virtual machine? What were your assumptions? Was your application single-threaded or multi-threaded? How did you size your CPU core? And how did you size your DRAM? I go, huh? And I say, what were the architectural trade-offs you faced when you secured it? For example, I see you didn't have you only had a web application firewall from AWS. What were those major weaknesses in that? What is it that AWS WAF doesn't cover? And the person goes, huh? And then I say, I see you use the Apache web server. Could you tell me the architectural considerations between Apache and Nginx? And they go, huh? And then I say, what was your strategy to harden the operating system, and what architectural options did you consider? And they say, what do you mean? And I say, that's because you know engineering and I know architecture, and they're completely different. So when you show what you don't know, you're actually showing that you don't know the job, and that's why things going there. So if you provide the things that real architects do, I mean, look at David Linthicum. Look at all the blogs he's written. Why is it? Because that's what he and I have done. We've written architectural white papers, thought leadership documents. Now, what do you do as an architect, as a solutions architect, to prove your point? You go out there and you present at every conference you possibly can. And that's why I've presented at thousands of conferences, most likely. 2 to 3 a week for 20 years straight. Maybe you write a book. Maybe, for example, you're like me and you go to CIO Magazine and you write content for them, or you're in Forbes, or you're in Business Week, or you're in Information Week, or you're in Tech Republic or Tech Radar like me, because you're proving yourself. That's how you're showing your work. You're doing what architects do. So if you want to show me you're an airplane pilot, take photos of you flying a plane. But if you think the architect job is engineering, which it isn't, and you think you're going to impress me by showing you know how to code, what ultimately happens, and it's the saddest thing ever, is somebody works there. And I see it all the time. I've done 6,000 architect interviews, and here's what we get told. That person's too techy. Why do they want to talk about the tech? They didn't talk about any business. So here's what we see when we interview someone. So if we say, could you talk to me about EC2, what it is, how you size it, the limitations? Here's what the people that build it say. The people that build it say, oh, it's this AWS thing that we use for compute, and it's basically got various sizes and various families, and the families tell you how to use it. And then we say, okay, what is it? And the person doesn't know. How do you size it? So what is the difference between tell me about the CPU that you've chosen, not in the marketing terms. Talk to me about PCI lanes. Talk to me about cores. Talk to me about frequency. Talk to me about the impact of that on machine learning. Talk to me about the impact on something else. And the person knows. So prove that you know architecture. If someone's asking you how to design a rocket, talk about how to design a rocket. If someone's asking you how to design a security architecture and you can talk about designs, and you can talk about design trade-offs and design optimizations and how each design option mitigates risk or reduces risk, you prove to me you're a subject matter expert. But it's not going to be coming from building it. I don't care if you can build it or not build it. And quite frankly, I know if you can build it, chances are you've spent not enough time learning how it works, learning how the strategy is, because you can only spend your time in one place. So that's why all the buildings that are designed out there that look pretty, they're designed by architects. And I promise you, not a single one of them knows how to build a house. Not a single one of them knows anything about building a hotel, but they know how to design it. So you want to be a great solutions architect? Here's what your job is: sell. How do you show you're good in a solutions architect role? Well, Mike brought in $150 million of sales and somebody else brought in $4 million. Whose bonus do you think is $400,000 higher that year? Who got promoted? 100 million versus 4 million. Who's more valuable to the company? And has nothing to do with the tech. It's the solutions architect role is a pre-sales role in most cases. Who gets promoted? The person that sells 20 versus 10. The person with $20 million of sales gets promoted and earns more. The person with 10 gets a warning. The person with $20 million of sales gets a promotion, earns an extra $50,000 a year. The person with 10 million of sales gets a warning and says, you need to fix this. So remember what the role is. Remember what the goal of the role is. If you're an airplane pilot, it's about getting to people there safely. If you're a solutions architect, generally speaking, it's about what you can sell to the client and what your solution does to improve their performance. Their business performance. How do we measure an architecture's result? Well, generally speaking, that's the first question we architects asking the client in the first meeting to the CEO. What would you consider success for this project? I want to know in their words. Mike, I want revenue to go up. How much? Okay, you want revenue to go up by 1%. The architecture didn't bring the revenue up by 1%. It's an architecture failure. But I want to increase customer satisfaction by this. Okay, we know what problem we're trying to solve. And then it's all about how effective our plan is at getting them there. So you want to prove results. How does a doctor prove results? They prove results by getting their patients healthy, doing the surgery and getting them out of the hospital alive, restoring sight to a blind person, taking a person in a wheelchair, getting them walking, curing cancer. I don't care. How do you become successful as an architect? You make your client successful. And you don't make your client successful by touching the technology. You're basically determining which weapon your client you can use to gain a competitive advantage over its other clients. That's the architect's job. Prove to me you can select the right thing, and I'll hire you for the biggest job possible. But show me what your focus is on tech and not the business. You just prove to me you're not an architect in the first place. So I hope that makes sense. I need to see the strategist. I need to see the leader. I need to see the executive. I need to see the person that can close a deal. That's how you show your work, and that's how your work's measured. Your work as an architect is measured, especially a solutions architect, by how much you sell, how much revenue you brought in, what your customer satisfaction scores are, what your customers said about you, were your clients successful. And not only does that prove you a better solutions architect, not only does that get promoted, not only does that get you earn more, but over time, when you deliver those results for various executives in various organizations, what you'll find is your phone will not stop ringing. Mike, we need a new architect. You've helped us in the past. Would you be curious? That's what I would do. Focus on showing you're a great architect. Don't try to ever show yourself as a good engineer if you want to be a great architect. Now, if you want to be a great engineer, I want you to prove to the world you're an engineer. I want you to be an architect. I want you to prove to the world you're a great architect. Want to be a physician? I don't want you to prove to me that you're a nurse. I really don't, even if you used to be a nurse. I want you to prove to me you're a physician. So I hope that helps, Alex. These are really strong questions that everybody asked. Wanted to remind everyone that tomorrow we have an AI architect webinar, and it's David Lithicum and me. So you'll get to ask either one of us, and together we've been architects for over 60 years. Let me say it again, over 60 years. And all I can tell you that at least 55 of the 60 years for the two of us have been in the chief architect, distinguished architect position, CTO, C-suite, or above. So you get to hear from the people that have already made it to the top. We've hired thousands. We've interviewed thousands, each one of us. We've hired countless people. We've both been published in every major article, publication you can think of. And we're going to be there completely free tomorrow to help you in your career. Ask us questions live on Zoom. Chris from my team will pop that. And if it's not an AI architect career, but a security architect or a cloud architect, we'll answer those questions too. We just want to help you. So join us tomorrow. Now, I also wanted to remind you in the description of this video, we've got guides on how to win the interview, guides on how to become a cloud architect or an AI architect or an enterprise architect. Go sign up for them. They'll be emailed to you, and they're completely free. And we currently have, for a limited period of time, our 50% off summer savings. Take advantage of that, and hope to see you in class. Take care, everyone, and I will see so many of you soon. Take care.